So to kind of go into a little bit more details of these changes, so breaking changes, like I touched on that, making changes without understanding the impact, changing how you call the API, not knowing who's using it, having a disruption to a production application, that kind of thing. Challenges around that were people just didn't know. We didn't have analytics. They didn't know who was consuming these services, no way to see. We didn't have a versioning strategy. So if we knew that we shouldn't break this API and we needed to create a new version of it, we didn't really have a strategy of how to manage that, what to do there. So the solution was just to move towards a consolidated client registry where everybody registers their applications and what APIs they're going to consume so that we have one place that we can go to see all the consumers. Analytics to see how often, right? Even though you may have applications that are subscribed to an API, they may not actually be calling it. The application may have been retired, so it might not even be something that you really need to care about. So analytics are really important that way. Ownership is another one. If you don't know who owns these APIs, how do you even know who to talk to about, I need to make a change to this, or I need you to make a change, that kind of thing. And then again, the versioning strategy, having something for that. The next challenge was the redundant APIs. So 2, 3, 4 different versions of the same API going at a source of data or something like that. And although that isn't necessarily bad, but it's typically not great because from a maintenance standpoint, if you've got too many things going at some system and you need to rip and replace it, the impact of the change is a lot more significant. So again, didn't have analytics on that, who's consuming what, and what we typically all do, I think, right, is we all choose the path of least resistance, right? If I see there's an API out there that's kind of doing what I need, but it's not quite what I need, and I need to make a change, if I don't know who's using it, I don't know who would need to test it, I don't know who to coordinate with, I'm just going to punt and create my own new API. So those are kind of the problems that we'd see with the lack of analytics, and a catalog was another one too. If you don't know where to look to see what's available, how do you even know if there is an API that you can use? Who's the owner? Is it really right for me? Who can I talk to? That kind of thing. So again, that kind of gets to the solution, a unified catalog where all of our APIs can be so we can find them. Again, the analytics, super important aspect of how to solve this problem. And ownership, again, have to have somebody that you can at least start a conversation with quickly to avoid that sort of path of least resistance problem. Another challenge for us was authentication and authorization. So primarily Microsoft environment, so we kind of followed their best practices, Kerberos and Active Directory, and with Microsoft, everything just kind of magically works. You don't even know how it's working, it just does, right? But then, at some point, you have something that isn't Microsoft that needs to call an API or something like that. And that's when Kerberos isn't necessarily as great. Another scenario is external vendors. You don't necessarily want to be managing their credentials in Active Directory or exposing it, or at least for us, we really didn't have a good way for our external partners to manage their own credentials if they need to change their password, that kind of thing. We didn't really have a good way for them to do that. So another thing too was that we had authorization sometimes in Active Directory, sometimes it was in custom code, just kind of in a lot of different places. And that proposed a challenge from identity and access management, which is really understanding who has what systems, what people have access to what in the organization. So the solution to that was we had a lot of hard conversations about this topic. We landed on OAuth 2.0 and OAuth scopes for our authentication and authorization. Like I said, that was a big conversation in our organization, being a Microsoft-based one. But we really felt that was the right approach to give us the agility and the ability to sort of manage identity and access management all in one place. And then the last challenge was the external one that I mentioned before. So again, we had the same issue with authentication, authorization. How do we manage that? Another one was, how do we protect the resources behind our APIs? If we expose them, even if we do whitelisting or something like that, that vendor may just all of a sudden ramp up, how many times they're hitting their API. It may go from 10 a day to like 2,000 because they decided to do something different. We don't necessarily know. How do we protect our resources that are behind these APIs to make sure that they don't take down other key systems that we weren't prepared for, things like throttling and whatnot. So we had a gap there. Quality of service monitoring, if we have issues, how do we know if our APIs now all of a sudden are taking 2 minutes instead of 20 seconds or 2 seconds or something like that, right? So having analytics to be able to get notifications and alerts when things are going awry that way. So solution for that is really introducing the concept of an API gateway, which gives you a lot of that functionality.